Control what you can, cope with the rest. And just remember, the only thing you can really control is you.
Well, hello, everyone. You're back on the Faculty Factory podcast with Kim Skorupski and the whole community around faculty affairs and faculty development. We have Dr. George Everly. Hi, George.
Good morning, Kim.
And so I just wanted to maybe just pause and let Dr. Everly introduce yourself.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me back. I spend time at the Bloomberg School of Public Health and also in the School of Medicine. My focus started out in my career in psychological trauma. And as evidence, I'm not the smartest guy around. It took me 20 years to figure out maybe what I should be studying is resilience. And I think that we have typically, in both medicine and public health, we have underestimated, not all of us, but many of us, the role of mental health in what makes a strong and resilient society. Mental health is an intrinsic thread that provides the horsepower to society. And when mental health is threatened, we begin to see the foundations of society itself threatened. The worst thing we can do is sit back and do nothing. The worst thing we can do, Kim, is to become a victim to this process. I thought I'd reflect on some thoughts that I actually put together for an article for Worth magazine, and it's called Masters of Adversity, Learning from the Best on Coping with the Worst. So what have we learned? What have I seen? And again, this is one person's observation. And not only studying bad things, but taking a look at what people do to not only bounce back, Kim, but perhaps spring forward. Is it really possible that from the ashes of the phoenix, something bigger, better, bolder can emerge? And I think they can. So what are some of those tips? What have I learned from what I call the masters of adversity? They first and foremost, I believe, have an attitude of resilience. That's not enough. I mean, that's pithy. What does that really mean? To me, that means that they understand, forgive the triteness, but they understand life is a journey. I mean, it really, really is a journey. And if we set life up as destination points, whether they are good things or bad things, they will define us. If we understand that life is a process, these things will never define us. They will simply be milestones. We must see it as one point on this marathon of life. So the first thing that I think those masters of adversity saw and understood was this is a process. And sometimes, albeit painful, it is the opportunity to not only bounce back, but to spring forward. How do they do that? Second point, they have a vision. And that vision is of tomorrow. That vision is of a tomorrow that can be better than today. They believe that that vision is more than just this ethereal construction, but rather it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And as I know you're aware, Kim, the science of self-fulfilling prophecy is really quite amazing. The notion goes back to the sociologists, the Thomas theorem, and then Robert Merton, who basically said, as you believe, so the likelihood of that action coming true is enhanced. And we also know that the more you think about something, the better you become at it. So if you think about worry, if that's what you do, the more you worry, the better you become at it. What the masters of adversity do is see the vision. And the more they think about a better tomorrow, the closer they become to that reality. Things don't always go according to plan. So what happens when the train goes off the rails? Sometimes, Kim, we have to help the train get back on the rails. So what do we understand? We understand the power of tenacity. Maybe one of the single best maybe one of the single best predictors of happiness and success in life. Those who give up never know how close they came. I am reminded of the great 20s film star, Mary Pickford. the biggest star of her era. And then she gets blindsided by the talkies and basically puts her out of a job. She, however, rather than get back on the track, decided to build a new railroad.
Huh.
So she got together with her husband, Douglas Fairbanks, who was the leading male star of the era, and some others, and they formed the first film production company owned by actors.
Wow.
And that company was called, and is today, United Artists.
Oh my gosh. Huh.
But she said something interesting. She said this thing we call failure doesn't happen until you stop trying. We have a vision. I have a vision, you have a vision, and you've said, and others whose visions have become clouded or disrupted or no longer viable. Well, part of understanding the journey part of the vision is that sometimes the vision has to change. Because no one is 100% prescient. No one can see the future. No one can say, if I do this, and this, then the finality is guaranteed. I remembered, of course, Robert J. Lifton, his famous book on the survivors of Hiroshima. His lesser-known book was Proteus. And he took the title and the theme from the Greek myth of Proteus, who was a shapeshifter. He fit his shape to the demands of the time.
So there's got to be some guardrails around that shape-shifting, right?
Well, I think we have to be careful to understand who's in control. Are we chasing the money and surrendering our lives to some external force? I mean, I understand we have to be funded. I get it. But we never want to surrender who we are to what we want to be.
Say that again.
We never want to surrender who we are to what we want to be.
Ooh.
I just made that up.
I love it.
So tomorrow you'll see it at a Hallmark store. So if that is true, it allows us to change who we are to fit the situation. And that is consonant with the journey construct. You're always moving. You hit something that some would call a failure. I simply call a point on the journey. The only failure, according to Mary Pickford, is when you stop trying. How about if we hit that brick wall and we start advancing in another direction? Sometimes we advance in the opposite direction because that is the direction we should have been heading in the first place. But we always keep moving. There simply is no such thing, Kim, as failure. It just doesn't exist. But let's not sit in the back seat. We need to be in the driver's seat. And you never know. There may be opportunities out there that we never would have realized had adversity not come into our lives. Marcus Aurelius, the famous Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, basically said, control what you can, cope with the rest. And just remember, the only thing you can really control is you.
You're back at the Faculty Factory podcast, and I'm Kim Skorupski looking at Dr. Wendy Ward. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Kim.
Well, everybody out there listening, Dr. Wendy Ward, the Associate Provost for Faculty in the Division of Academic Affairs at the University of Arkansas Medical Sciences. She is our most frequent flyer, high miles, priority club member, so many episodes.
And there's two pieces that I think faculty affairs and development professionals could think about more often and implement. One of those is really getting in the space of efficiency of practice and trying to help people at the unit level, at the clinic level, have the tools to be able to say, this is not working well, it's increasing our stress level, we'd like to try something different here. And we found that our chief quality officer and the programs that he was doing were bigger picture, sort of length of stay and targeting trying to be better than national averages so that we could recuperate money, and that's important. And some of that work was patient satisfaction or patient care focused. But if we brought wellness to the quality improvement model, and I believe I spoke about this in a little bit in one of my previous podcasts, the quality improvement in advanced learning program, if we could do that to our faculty, our clinical staff, and our residents, and give them the tools to make changes in their own units, then they have less hopelessness, less helplessness, more power and autonomy to fix things. And so we've really been partnering with the quality office and trying to have those conversations and implement those kinds of changes at that unit, at that small specific level where a small tweak in process can have a big impact.
Okay, Wendy, wait a second. Can you give us an example of what a thing or a couple things that have changed as a result of this empowerment of owning a process, or the quality officer either did it or the faculty did it? What give us an example if you can.
Sure. Discharge processing has been a source of stress. So trying to make sure that all the pieces are in place so that a discharge can happen efficiently. Now, the quality office is interested in that because we need to have discharge processes that are consistent with other benchmarks. But the staff are interested in that because they're having to continue to manage people who are really ready to go home while they're intaking new people. And sometimes there's a crunch waiting for that bed. So trying to improve the discharge process has been an important one. And we've done a couple of things to try and help with that. One of which is to streamline things, and we use Epic, but it's streamline things in our electronic health record so that everyone is getting pop-ups and reminders so they can sign off and do what they need to do to try and streamline it. And that's all automated. So no one is having to call, like a nurse trying to call around, or unit clerk to make sure that all things are set. The other thing that we did, and we had to stop because of the pandemic, but we created a discharge unit. It was an ambulatory unit, not beds, but we could transition people into that unit waiting for those signatures, and it allowed us an opportunity for our students to be able to go over discharge recommendations and see if there were any questions or concerns, and avoid a return to hospitalization or lots of calls later. I don't understand this. I don't understand that. There's also a med reconciliation process that happened with our pharmacy students. And that allowed the units where those patients were to be able to transition them while feeling that they're going to be well taken care of and they can shift their focus. Maybe one final touch point on how we can support each other from a wellness perspective. We're doing a lot of workshops on post-traumatic growth, but we're trying to talk to people about what it's like to go through a prolonged traumatic event. And it isn't that the pandemic's going to end and poof, we feel better. We're exhausted. We're emotionally drained. We need a period of healing. And if you know anything about that literature, you know that that's intentional rest and work reduction, or in some way just allowing us some grace to breathe and come back to baseline. Or some people, when they have time to breathe and reflect, actually come back to better than baseline. Right. And you may have I know I've met people who are already sort of thinking about the epiphanies that they have had during this transition. And if you look at the post-traumatic growth literature, there's 5 or 6 areas in which you might grow from this experience. And that flips the perspective, the cognitive approach to thinking about you in a pandemic, which is as a victim. And you can now think about yourself as a survivor and a thriver. And so some of those things are, you might have realized you have more internal strength than you knew. And you take that confidence with you into the future, right? Right. You might have been exploring the meaning in the work that you do, whether that's meaning in relationship to a particular religion or just meaning in the work, and recognizing yourself as doing a high degree of meaning in your work. And we know that that promotes vitality, enthusiasm about work, engagement, that sort of thing. And so you deepen that cognitive engagement with fundamental existential questions about death and the purpose of life and that deeper meaning. Then there also are people who decide to make changes, right? Mm-hmm. They might reflect upon this period and say, I'd like to be more involved with students after this experience, or I'd like to be more involved in research on the impact on the workforce, or I might want to be doing something a little bit different in my life, in my career. We certainly know some people are deciding to retire at this point after being through it. So just opening your eyes to new opportunities and reframing your purpose can be another outcome of a prolonged traumatic event. Certainly greater appreciation for life, that gratitude. People frequently say they've got a silver lining. I know what my silver linings have been, several, work-related and personal, that have helped me reframe the experience that I'm going through. But just the appreciation and the gratitude. And then the final thing is people tend to gravitate toward relationships. So they grow closer to supportive others. Those relationships deepen in connection and authentic sharing. You become closer and you better accept the idea that you need others and that they need you. So all 5 of those are things that we might pull and not just survive, but thrive after the pandemic, come to a place that's better than we were before the pandemic as a function of reflecting on all of these particular aspects.
Oh, Wendy Ward, post-traumatic growth literature. I love those growth areas of moving from victim to survivor, thriver.
Welcome back to the Faculty Factory podcast, friends. It's Kim Skorupski here at UTMB, the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas. And I happen to be looking at our guest today, Dr. Nicole Piemonte. Hi, Kim. Well, folks, let me tell you about Dr. Piemonte. Nicole has her own coaching practice. It's called Meaning in Medicine, LLC. She is the Associate Dean for Faculty Leadership and Associate Clinical Professor for Medical Humanities, both at Creighton University's School of Medicine at the Phoenix, Arizona location. Also, the author of 2 books, Afflicted, How Vulnerability Can Heal Medical Education and Practice, and most recently, Death and Dying, where she talks about end-of-life conversations. So as I mentioned, she is a certified professional coach from the Healthcare Leadership Coaching Society, International Coaching Federation certified. She has some wonderful content, a great heart, rich and deep history in academic health. And so again, Dr. Nicole Piemonte, take it away.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you for that generous introduction. It's very kind. I'm grateful to be here, grateful to be talking to you, someone who is connected to a university that has meant a lot to me at UTMB. At the time that I attended what is now the Institute for Bioethics and Health Humanities was the Institute for Medical Humanities, where I got a PhD in medical humanities, the only place in the world that I could get a PhD in medical humanities. And it's really a transformative experience for me. Before I had attended, I had recently lost my mom after taking care of her. She had ovarian cancer. And she died right before I moved to Galveston to start my PhD. And my work at UTMB at the time was focused on vulnerability or the lack of vulnerability in medicine. And the question that kept swirling around my head was, how was it that my mom, who was a nurse and very likely knew she was dying, when in the hospital, she was offered like a 4th-line chemotherapy treatment, and then died 6 hours later, and why we didn't have a conversation around death, and that there wasn't an honest conversation around that with her physicians. It had been surprising to me because she's offered this new line of chemotherapy. We think we're going to do that. And then a few hours later, a palliative medicine doctor's in there. I didn't even know what that was. And then she died, what to us seemed very suddenly. And what I learned is that we were not, and still struggle to, train our future clinicians to be present with vulnerability, to be present with death and dying, and to have these end of life conversations. And so this wasn't a moral failing of my mom's clinicians. This was the fact that it is much easier to teach a technician than it is to teach or train a healer who can be present with suffering, especially suffering that might be existential or spiritual or emotional. So I've kind of dedicated much of my work to thinking about ways to cultivate vulnerability safely for our clinicians so that they are prepared for the realities of healthcare. And while I've had opportunities to create curriculum around that, especially at Creighton, which has been amazing, now and then, I served as this Dean of Student Affairs over at Creighton, and a lot of those themes kept bubbling up. Vulnerability, and are we really helping our students be prepared for that? And then now, as a coach, I feel like I'm creating a space for clinicians to be able to grapple with vulnerability, with questions of their own self-efficacy, imposter phenomenon, and giving a space for that. And so my work seems much more applied these days. So when I give talks at various places, I may or may not, but I may share the story of my mom, and then a few years later, actually losing my dad, and what that has been like, and how that helps enrich my understanding of medicine and medical education and healthcare. And inevitably, after I give a talk like that, I'm in conversation afterwards with people who feel that there is an opportunity for them to share maybe their own suffering and how that informs their work. That's the core of the health humanities. That story is transformative. So how are we going to teach first and second year medical students, for instance, the lived experience of illness and the nature of suffering if they may not have had that experience with a family member or their own illness experience? Some of them have, but very few have. It's through story. It's through hearing from patients themselves. It's through film and documentary. It's through a novel or short story. It's never going to be through stats and figures and tables on a slide of the various ways that people suffer. It is through story. So I do think story is powerful. And that's why I want to carve out spaces in healthcare for people to be vulnerable enough to speak about their own lives. And that's where I think real compassion comes from, because people are able to tap into their own suffering in order to feel alongside their patients or others who are suffering.
Yeah. I'm putting my hat on as a faculty member where we're so trained to be unbiased, scientific, logical, rational, focused on productivity and generating revenue and generating scholarship and building collaborations, all that doing, and looked upon as the expert, and all of those kind of stereotypes we place about the faculty members and leaders in academic health.
Mm-hmm.
How do we balance that as a faculty member with the fact that, yes, I am like an onion. There are many layers to me. I too am someone's daughter, someone's son, someone's partner, someone's mom, someone's dad. How do we bring those worlds together without being overly personal or too woo-woo, or making our deans, our leaders, our patients feel like this is kind of inappropriate? Is this person taking their science this seriously, or is this a physician or a clinician I can trust? They're really a little bit, they're not like I thought. So how do we, in reality, what can we do that can bring the fullness of ourselves to these relationships without being so vulnerable that maybe someone's going to use it against me? Nicole, I'm sure you coach hundreds of faculty members. You see it, we know it's part of them, but they don't want to necessarily divulge it because there's some fear that, first of all, I won't be viewed as being serious, but also someone could take advantage of the fact that I just shared with you that my gosh, I have some struggles at home, or I've got some family things I'm going through, and I don't feel like I can be present for the next couple weeks or that meeting next month. I need someone. How do you coach them, or what words do you have about this whole topic?
Such a great question. And I don't want to misrepresent the idea of vulnerability, that it is, oversharing or overconnecting or being inappropriate in situations. And so there is some mindfulness that comes there. What I suppose is most important is, let's talk about compassion, for instance. If we go to the etymological root of it, like the Latin root of compassion, we've got passion, which is the experience of pain. This is why you hear things like the Passion of the Christ, right? Like it's the experience of pain. And then we have com, which is combination or in union together. So compassion literally means the experience of feeling pain together, the co-feeling. So connecting to my own pain doesn't necessarily mean I'm talking about it or telling stories about it, but it might be in order to have compassion for this student or this patient. I have to be willing to tap into my own experience of pain and suffering to feel alongside this person. It's not about pitying them. It's not about sympathy. It's kind of about empathy, but it's about co-feeling. And that's what compassion means. So we are always already our personal and professional self all of the time. What happens at home affects us at work. What happens at work affects us at home. To pretend that that is not the reality and to keep maintaining this, what we call like a professional distance. I have to keep this person at arm's length. My first year medical students start talking about this the second week of school. Oh, I cannot connect with patients. I can't overly connect because then I'll burn out. That's what they believe. But really, it's the connecting with the patient, tapping into my own potential for suffering. That is what creates deep meaning, a sense of purpose. And when you look at the literature, when we maintain professional distance and don't connect, this is ironically what leads to burnout. This is what creates kind of like factory line engagement with patients. You see them every 15 minutes. It's just transactional to generate our views. That's what's burning people out. Not connecting with people and recognizing that we are vulnerable together on this earth. And we need to create opportunities for real connection for our students, for our residents, for our faculty, to understand that tapping into our vulnerability is not scary, it's human, and it is what allows us to connect to people. And it's not creating burnout. Oftentimes, Kim, people talk about compassion fatigue. You hear it all the time. And what we see is that it is not compassion or co-feeling that is fatiguing us, because there's neuroscience studies show that having compassion leads to compassionate action. And when I engage in that action, I feel energized, I feel connected, I feel my work is meaningful. But we are being fatigued by something. So what is it? What is it that clinicians are being fatigued by? What is it that people who work with students who might be suffering, what are they fatigued by? What's going on here? It's the fact that the cycle of compassion cannot be completed as healthcare stands right now. So you might see a suffering patient, feel compassion, and it might be that they're dying or it's a trauma and they die at the end of it and it's tragic and terrible and you can't make good on your compassion. And absolutely, that can be emotionally exhausting, fatiguing, damaging. What I am most worried about is the fact that so many of our clinicians see someone who's suffering, experience compassion that inspires action, but they can't make good on it because of insurance claims or values mismatch between their healthcare organization and what they feel called to do, lack of resources. You think of COVID when Our clinicians didn't have the right resources to connect with people. That is what's fatiguing people, not being able to make good on their compassion because they're told they only have 15 minutes to talk to someone. It's not the connection that's causing it. It's the lack of connection that's causing it. And as faculty, I think we should be concerned about that. Yeah.
You're right. So what can we do? Because I think a lot of the times, we've had conversations with many people around the North America about burnout and resilience, and we've all had similar conversations of you can't just toss a yoga mat at a faculty person and say you're burned out because there's something wrong with you. You better fix yourself. You better get straight. Drink some more water. You better do some more mindfulness. And we inevitably come back to these are systems level issues that we have to change the way we finance healthcare, the way we bill, the way we dedicate resources, the way we budget time and humans. So, outside of our being any of us listening to this podcast have the ability to do that, what can we do? What are some examples of how you coach and through your work, you provide examples of opportunities to kind of fix that gap or close that gap of shrinking, stretching?
That's the major problem, isn't it? And we all know that the whole healthcare system needs an entire rethink. And that's putting it kindly of the state of our healthcare system. And until some of those much larger economic and sociological issues are addressed, this is kind of what we've got. Working in medicine and healthcare has pushed me to become very practical in some of our approaches. What can we actually do? So the research shows that, let's talk about clinicians for a minute. Research shows that by and large, clinicians are more resilient than the lay population. You think of the training programs they had to get through in order to be here. So it's not about, let's give them like remedial resiliency training. That's not what we're talking about. They are resilient. So what are we talking about? I think we're talking about getting them reconnected to themselves. How do we get them reconnected to themselves so they can bring their whole selves to clinical practice, for instance? So what does that look like? Coaching is one way, right? Therapy is another way. But in coaching, I try to get people who, by and large, have neglected thinking about themselves or their pain for a very long time because they've had to. We talk about delayed gratification and all of these things. So they've been kind of trained to not think about what's going on inside. And so coaching can be a space for them to start to reflect on, wow, am I actually doing what I really want to be doing? Is this what I'm passionate about? Am I connecting to people and helping them to reconnect to people? So coaching is one of those things. Another thing is normalizing vulnerability and normalizing that for our clinicians and for our students, for our residents. One thing we do at our hospital, and many of your listeners will be familiar with this, is Schwartz rounds. This was, created in the 90s. Ken Schwartz was a healthcare attorney who died of lung cancer when he was 40, and he had decided that, he wrote a piece in the Boston Globe that his caregivers are what made the unbearable bearable. And he had fear that managed care organizations that were developing in that time, PPOs, were stripping the compassion out of medicine and making it transactional. So his dying wish was for a center that was dedicated to compassion. So we've got the Schwartz Center out in Massachusetts. I had the amazing opportunity to be at Mass Gen Hospital last week, where Schwartz Rounds was started, and to kind of meet the people who've been there from the start. And what Schwartz Rounds are getting everybody in the hospital who wants to attend together, staff from everywhere, and you've got a panel of 3 to 4 people, either talking about a difficult case or a theme. And they're talking about what it feels like to be a clinician or a hospital staff person taking care of patients and how painful that can be. or how beautiful that can be. And then their stories are very short, back to stories and how powerful they are. And the rest of the people who are in attendance share their experience and their stories. People who are familiar with balance groups, it's kind of like a giant balance group. And we are normalizing people sharing their stories. And this has become standing room only at our hospital. And I do think we are chipping away at letting people say you can be your whole self at work and you will be seen and known and connected to other people.
Amen. Yes, absolutely. So what can we do? We can reconnect to ourselves and
Yes.
provide opportunities, even if you, again, feeling, well, I can't do this. I can't do this short runs at my place. You can do something in your
Yes.
clinic, your lab, your division, your department. You can start those conversations where, again, you're destigmatizing vulnerable situations in life. You're
Yes.
you're making it normal to talk about, oh my gosh, I'm struggling with this, or my marriage that, or my kids this, or my parents that,
Yep.
or my nagging pain this. And normal, like I'm a gerontologist, so I'm trying very hard to normalize the life course and aging and destigmatizing aging. This is just normal. We all are doing it. Let's not
Yeah.
pretend it's not going to happen. So I love those two recommendations of looking inward, taking a moment, and then providing opportunities for stories. Thanks for tuning in to the Faculty Factory podcast. We are a faculty development community sharing tools to build academic leaders in healthcare. Maybe you want to be interviewed on the podcast? Please visit facultyfactory.org/contact and send me a message there. The Faculty Factory podcast and website is sponsored by the Office of Faculty Affairs at the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, Texas.